All right, hey folks, Gary here with Paramount Tactical Solutions, your source for guns, gear, training, and tactics, all brought to you by real world experience. So in today's video, I want to address a bad habit that I see all the time, and almost every shooter is guilty of it, at least occasionally, but I see a lot of people, this is kind of their standard operating procedure. And they do it because, number one, they don't realize what a bad habit it is, the negative impacts that it has on shooting and your ability to be ready for defensive marksmanship, combat marksmanship, whatever you want to call it. This one bad habit has negative consequences across three major areas. Number one, it indicates a lack of seriousness or intent every time that you pick up a firearm. Folks, every time that you grab a gun or you're going to grab a gun, all right, there's something that should switch in your head. You got that switch that goes off where everything that now that you're getting ready to do is deliberate, it's intentional. You're analyzing what's going on. So doing this, which we'll talk about in a second, it indicates that you are not deliberate about that it is not intentional, and that you're not serious when you get that firearm. The second major problem with this bad habit is that it literally regresses your training. Every time that you do this, some of the repetitions that you've done in the past, trying to achieve a higher proficiency at another skill set, all right, you're removing. And we'll talk about that specifically as well. Lastly, it's mechanically wrong. Every time that you do this, you're introducing the possibility where your gun will not fire when you need it to, and if that happens under a defensive engagement, obviously that could cost you your life. All right, so before we address the topic at hand, let's talk about the opposite end of the spectrum, which is reloads, right? I think we can all agree that being able to reload a pistol or a rifle efficiently is an important skill to have. And I see a lot of people spending a lot of time practicing reloads because they're kind of fun, right? And they're kind of sexy looking. That's another reason. I remember just recently I was running a course and I was doing a demonstration for a drill that was coming up. And typically before I do a demonstration, I will do a mag exchange. I will exchange a partial mag, if I have one, for a full mag. Well, I got to talking, got excited, didn't really think about that, and went to go do this demonstration. And I believe it was a target transition. So I was shooting a few rounds on this target, shooting a few rounds on this target. Well, I remember I drew that gun, started shooting, pow, 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 actually went dry. All right, I did a mag change really efficiently, and then I went ahead and engaged the other target, finished the drill. But I remember when I did that mag change, I did it very fast, very fluid, and everybody, literally the entire class was like, oh. Now, the point is they weren't impressed with the fact that I was able to rapidly engage two different targets with multiple rounds and putting all of those rounds in the spot that I wanted them to. They were impressed with that reload. And that's something that a lot of us do. So we like to practice things that are sexy. But I think we can all agree that we all have limited time. We have limited time, limited resources. Most of us will admit that we don't feel like we train with our firearms nearly enough. So with that being said, we need to be smart with our time, smart with our resources, especially now, right? I mean, ammo is like 47 bucks a round. So if we think about that, then we need to be deliberate how we approach training and kind of prioritize what is really important. So before we ever get to that reload, and typically reloads with a handgun is typically, one reload per every 15 rounds. Now with a fighting rifle, it's one to every 30 rounds. And I did say fighting rifle, you could say assault rifle if you want. And those of you screaming at the screen right now saying, it's a sporting rifle, all right, you're part of the problem, because the game of semantics is not going to win this fight to preserve and protect the Second Amendment. There is nobody out there that does not win hearts and minds, right? You don't change anybody's mind on that. So quit trying to play that stupid semantic game. Bloomberg didn't go up there and say, oh, look, we didn't get rid of assault rifles, and somebody screamed from the crowd, hey, no, it's a sporting rifle. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's just a sporting rifle. Well, never mind, forget about the whole thing. Folks, if anything, when it comes to the Second Amendment, we need to be going on the offensive. We need to be saying, hey, you know what? We need to repeal the National Firearms Act, the NFA. We need to move forward, not just try to preserve what we currently have. So quit doing the semantic game. It doesn't work. It's silly. All right. So again, 1 to 30 to 1 to 15. So that means that everything prior to that mag change takes priority. And there's lots of things that we can work on before we get to that mag change. Target transitions, shooting from behind cover, shooting on the move, whatever it is, there's a whole lot of other skill sets involved before we ever get to that mag change. As a matter of fact, if you work on those skills, chances are you probably won't have to do a mag change in a normal civilian engagement, right? So those are the things where we need to put priority. But if we look at that 1 to 15 rounds, out of all of that, what is the most important round? What's the most important one? Well, it's the first one. And that's what we're going to address today, is that initial load. And this is the bad habit that so many people get wrong. And I'm going to show you a demonstration of how a lot of people load their handgun and I'm going to talk about the negative effects of that. Then I'm also going to show you how to do it correctly and the positive impacts of that. And this, again, it's one of those small things, but it has a ripple effect across everything that you do when it comes to shooting recreationally or training for defensive or combat engagements. So first and foremost, we're going to clear this firearm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that there is no source of feed. If there was a magazine in there, I would drop it. I'm going to lock that slide back to the rear, and then I'm going to do a 3-point check. I'm checking, making sure that there's nothing in the magazine well, nothing in the chamber itself, or nothing on the rear of the slide. So we now have a clear pistol, safe and clear pistol. What I have over here are some dummy rounds, and I like to use all my dummy rounds, my training rounds, in these ETS clear magazines so I can clearly see that I'm training with all dummy rounds. How I see a lot of people load their firearm or load their handgun is something like this. All right, they grab the gun out, they push it in there, all right? And I've been guilty of that, I've done that. But there's a whole lot of different issues going on with that. So the first part, let's talk about from a training standpoint, why doing that is actually having an erosion effect on training that you've already put work into. So when we do a combat reload or emergency reload, whichever one you want to call it, and I want to make sure that we're defined, a emergency reload is when I've shot till my gun is empty, we're now slide lock, so now I have to do a reload. The way that we reload a gun, all right, the way that we reload a gun is from our workspace. When we're doing an emergency reload, this is our workspace. It is 3 to 6 inches from my nose. That's where my gun should be. I can see my threat downrange, but this gun is still in my peripheral vision. The other thing is I've made sure that I've maintained the same wrist position from my firing position. All I'm doing really is dropping the elbow and bringing this gun in. And I want you to notice the angle of the magazine well itself. All right, the reason that we bring it back to this point is because it works perfectly with our biomechanics. We're taking advantage of how our body works. So I bring it back to this point, and my hand naturally, I index this magazine, all right, but my hand naturally goes in that direction. It just works. Now the problem too is some people turn this ever so slightly. So now I gotta go around, all right, and get it like that. That takes extra time and it's less efficient. I wanna make sure that I have this gun up here in my workspace, and this is how I do a reload each and every single time. And many of you have thousands of reps doing this, and you're very quick at a reload. Or some of you have lots of reps doing this, and you still are very slow at a reload. So I'm gonna talk about some of those reasons as to why that might be the case. So anytime that I load my gun down here, all sloppily, right? Sloppy, it's actually sloppy, it's kind of lazy. The other way that I load my gun is up here. So I've actually erased a good repetition from a combat or emergency reload. That's what I've done with that. By doing it wrong, I'm getting good at doing it incorrectly. So every time that I go to load my gun on the initial load, all right, I approach it as a good repetition for a combat or emergency reload. I grab my gun, I lock the slide to the rear, I do a 3-point check, all right, I get that gun up in my workspace, I grab my magazine, I insert it, I hit my slide release, or you can do the slingshot method, doesn't matter. But now, and then I might check my sights, come back, but now I know my gun is loaded. And I have a good repetition. Imagine how good that you would be at combat reloads, emergency reloads, if every time that you had ever loaded a gun, you had actually gotten a good rep doing it that way. I also want to talk about why it's so mechanically wrong to do your initial load down here, loading on a closed slide and then racking the slide. So when we insert this magazine, it is a full magazine, all right? So that means that that spring is compressed all the way down here. There's a lot of spring compression pushing up against this round. That's why if you ever load your magazine, the last 3 or 4 rounds are the toughest to load, because we're fighting against more and more equal and opposite force. So what I'm trying to do is, when I insert this magazine, it goes up in here and it's actually this has to compress. All right, that first round for the magazine to seat all the way actually has to compress by about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. All right, and it's pushing on the bottom of that slide. A lot of times what people will do when they're loading on a closed slide is they actually push that magazine in. It doesn't actually lock in all the way. They think that it did, and then they rack the slide, but no round even went into the chamber. So now we think we have a live gun, but it's actually on the empty chamber. And the first time that we pull that gun out to react to a threat or do a drill, God forbid that you're actually reacting to a threat when this happens. But now I got to go into our immediate action drill. I got to slap that magazine, I got to rack the slide, and then I got to get back on target. So that could literally cost you your life. So it's just a bad way to do this. The other scenario that I see very often is people will grab their magazine, they're loading on that close slide, and they go to push it in, they think it clicks in, it might even make a click, and then they actually load, all right, they load that first round, but that was enough to displace the magazine because it wasn't quite locked into place. And then they go to shoot that first round, the gun goes off, and then their magazine falls to the floor. And while you're in training, that's all your cool points fall onto the floor. So you got to go and be embarrassed and grab your cool points. Obviously, if it's in a real world situation and you have ran into that issue, now you had one round, you got no other rounds, and you are way behind the power curve. So while this is a very small thing, it is extremely important. Matter of fact, there's nothing more important than the first round, right? We got to be able to get that first round. That's why it's so critical to make sure that you have that magazine seated, because that first round is most important. And then, you know, the next 3 or 4 rounds are also extremely important. We want to make sure that that magazine is feeding the way that it's supposed to. The problem that we're discussing, a failure to load, a failure to fire, and a failure for this magazine to seat correctly. You know, when it comes to immediate action drills, what we're trying to overcome is a failure to fire, but we slap that magazine, we rack the slide, all right, and then we re-engage. And that's to address 2 things. Number 1, a bad round or a failure to load, and also a failure for a magazine to be seated all the way. So there's an entire drill that's basically built around this, but yet we're loading this gun in a manner that almost guarantees at some point in time, we're gonna have to do that. So we need to create good habits. Some of you have gotten so good at this that you've gotten really, really good at just doing it wrong. And I see this with our clients. I go over in depth the importance of all this stuff. But yet when we get out there on the range, usually about halfway through, when they're tired and not thinking about it, I'm like, hey, everybody go ahead and lock and load, get ready for the next drill. I inevitably see somebody down there, insert the magazine, and it's because they've built a bad habit. They can't even help it. They're doing something incorrect, and they know it's incorrect. So again, anytime that you're getting ready to load this firearm or touch a firearm, again, that switch should be going off. Right? We become very deliberate, very serious about what's going on. So anytime that I go to load my pistol, the first thing I'm gonna do is grab that gun, I'm gonna lock the slide back to the rear, I'm gonna do a 3-point check, make sure that it's cleared and empty. I'm grabbing that magazine, I'm making sure that that gun, I'm in the perfect position. I am building perfect mechanics for a combat reload. And I hit that slide release, and or you can do the slingshot method, whatever works for you. I might press out, check my sights, all right, come back slowly, deliberately, carefully, reluctantly, reholster my gun. If you do that, all right, you won't have to practice your reloads, all right? It will be intuitive because every time you've ever loaded that gun, you've done it the exact same way every single time. And that's what you want to do. That's what builds consistency. And again, I know many of you are like, Gary, you know, it's just loading a gun. Well, exactly. It is loading a gun. You're getting yourself ready. All right, folks, I hope that was helpful. I hope that was informative, maybe even a little bit entertaining. And I hope that it changes your mindset, how you approach training, and how deliberate that you get anytime that you go to reach for a firearm. That switch should go off, everything should change. We should be much more deliberate, much more intentional about everything that we do and analyze everything that we do so that we can get better and better and better. And again, it's what you do when you're not on the range that greatly affects your performance on the range and or performance in a defensive engagement. So go check out our website, ParamountTactical.com. Go check out our upcoming training schedule. We'd love for you to come do some training with us. And check out the store on our website. The only items that we carry there are items that we've actually tested ourselves and we believe in. And then I want you to go check out our Facebook page, Paramount Tactical Solutions, and Instagram, Paramount_Tactical. So again, I want you to stay armed, stay ready, and we'll talk to you soon.